The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave the I Have a Dream speech 60 years ago. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 became law 59 years ago. Why can I not find equal justice under law? What had happened, Mr. President? They kidnapped Title VII. I went to get it back. And then they took my equal rights, straight tripping, just like that. Chicago courts have now become a big systemic trap. Chicago 7th Circuit can't find justice on a map. Please, Mr. President, a pardon from your courts. Believe I found some felonies, I know I found a tort. Chicago told our circuit equal justice is for all. That doggone 7th Circuit just went and built a wall. With everything your federal courts have really done to me, a sister needs some justice. That's a legal law degree. They're sitting on top of justice and acting like a throne. I thank you, we the people, 'cause now I'm not alone. Love, peace, and harmony is God's only way, and God is always in control. He blesses us every day. Hello, I am Delores Porter, U.S. Appellate Court Case 21-2185. This is my peaceful march to justice. Welcome aboard. Listen up. The U.S. 7th Circuit Court of Appeals is the appellate court for Chicago, the second largest city in America. Among all the federal circuit courts, the 7th Circuit Court is unique in that all of its judges are white. There are no sitting or active judges of color on the 7th Circuit bench. There is not a single judge on the 7th Circuit Court who self-identifies as LGBTQ. As an African-American female from the south side of Chicago, a 31-year honorably retired U.S. Army veteran with a presidential letter of appreciation from President Barack Obama, you better believe I was a prime target for systemic racism. On May 6, 2019, I filed an employment discrimination case under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 against the Social Security Administration, based on race, age, sex, color, harassment, and violation of the Privacy Act of 1974. My case arrived at the U.S. Supreme Court on May 18, 2022. I was directed by the court to provide the agency with a reasonable offer in the first initial court hearing. The government then needed a discovery process. Then I lost in a motion for summary judgment. The only thing discovered here was systemic law. Social Security Administration willfully caused my termination. The avoided veteran benefits granted under Public Law 114-75 by President Barack Obama. My appellate brief is then due to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals on August 4th, President Barack Obama's birthday. Welcome aboard Systemic Racism on Steroids. I identified the agency's systemic racism process in document number 1 filed with the courts. It is the African American female humiliation termination process. Agency policy stated the agency must ensure all employees complete the training. A legal contract is signed. The district court's ruling states it raises suspicion that all 4 African American women, and only those women, failed to complete the training. Further ruling, uniform armed guards were proper protocol at the time. Summary judgment is granted to the government. The agency stated, although passing, her supervisor will bring evidence to justify poor performance. The court says poor performance justifies uniform armed guards. In the agency's final agency decision, they admit to lowering my grade by 10%. Why were the federal courts required? SSA clearly charged me a 10% black tax. What part of willful malicious intent to terminate and humiliate African American females is not clearly understood here. These egregious acts legally constitute a tort, yet the U.S. 7th Circuit Court of Appeals found no evidence of discrimination. Is it a gavel or a magic wand? I found the agency displayed unequal application of more than 5 agency policies. The agency filed policies were applied correctly. I paid the court's docket fees for the courts to make the legal determination of policy. I am well aware of the agency's systemic understanding of policy. It is the reason why filing in the federal courts is mandatory if African American. U.S. federal courts rule in error in a simple case of policy with a legally signed contract. 7th Circuit's law of justification. Agasaki versus Illinois Department of Finance and Professional Regulations. Granting summary judgment, when the brunt of the evidence, her performance reviews by the supervisor, shows her performance was at best lackluster and unacceptable at worst. This systemic law is a blatant repeal of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let me break it down for you. If your white female supervisor describes you as substandard, the courts now award an automatic win in all Title VII discrimination cases. Not. If the supervisor's harassment results in termination, the agency is liable and there is no affirmative defense. Huff versus Sheehan. This unconstitutional law, enacted by Seventh Circuit, weighs evidence in the case of summary judgment, which is a violation of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Are you a fool, or do you think I'm a fool? Title VII is law and white privilege is not. Don't give me a bunch of who shot John. That dog ain't gonna hunt. I said U.S. Army, you sure ain't ready for me yet. I will whoop the hot slop out of you. I am the angry black woman. Failure is not an option. The U.S. Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, comprised of all white judges, has enacted a law of white privilege. Are you surprised? That's what happens when you put the head violator of civil rights in charge of justice. A newly appointed federal district court judge then retroactively applied Seventh Circuit's 2021 law to my Title VII case filed in 2019 and awarded judgment to the government. I now must appeal to the Seventh Circuit Court, requesting they repeal their own law of systemic racism. Not a chance. This law voids benefits granted by President Barack Obama and repeals Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. When the federal courts retroactively apply an unconstitutional law that repeals civil rights, punitive damages are justified. Judge Greg Mathis says if you demonstrate crackish ways, then you are a crackhead, and Judge Greg Mathis is a real judge. Summary judgment is based solely on evidence of triable fact. I presented perjury and false grades in the district court's ruling, confirmed in a request to admit by the U.S. attorney, and I lost in a motion for summary judgment. Where does systemic racism end? The courts re-identified proven perjury and evidence of false grades as uncontroverted evidence of fact of poor performance. The federal justice system in Chicago has lost their cotton-picking mind. The courts cannot void benefits granted by President Obama, nor can they enact a law that repeals Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and retroactively apply it. When the government enacts an unconstitutional law and inflicts emotional distress with threats of physical harm that target African American females, egregiously deploying armed guards, followed by economic deprivations, call it what it is. It is a hate crime known as genocide. It is also a violation of the Federal Tort Claims Act. Once in the federal courts, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure did not apply to me. The courts weighed evidence in a case of triable fact. The Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure did not apply to me. Seventh Circuit does not require the government to provide a legal response in accordance with Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure. I am an African American. At the U.S. Supreme Court rules state that I ran out of rights and must be selected for justice. I am an African American female in a Title VII case of employment discrimination against the federal government. I was not selected for justice in the first two federal courts. By the way, I don't run out of rights under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. America must have run out of justice. I requested a jury trial. It is denied. My oral argument is also denied. It would not aid the court. I'm not here to aid the court. I'm here to recover my equal rights under law, and I'm not here to play with you. U.S. Appellate Court ruling stated my termination was a failure to complete 8 cases per day, yet the district court's ruling confirmed that cases were not completed daily. The court's standards applied against African American females was not even feasibly possible. Based on allegations of poor performance by a white female supervisor, 2 SSA personnel guarded both doors to my training class until the uniformed armed guards arrived. I was escorted by a party of 5, including 2 uniformed armed guards and a radio operator who announces over the radio, "We're on the move." The Social Security Administration's African American Female Humiliation Termination process had the visual perception of a SWAT operation, and it was absolutely terrifying. Now, America can understand the true meaning of Black Lives Matter. Would this happen to you as a non-African American? During business hours, through open and public space, I was escorted from the 5th floor training area by a party of 5, through the halls, down the elevator, through the main corridor, and out of the 1st floor main entrance of a federal agency which employs over 500 personnel. This systemic racism process, identified as the African American Female Humiliation Termination process, is confirmed. Armed guards, really? I was put in a life-threatening situation based on allegations of poor performance. Once I filed in the federal courts, the government requested my deposition. I was unaware that the deposition was a 5-hour interrogation by a U.S. Assistant State's Attorney. Repeated egregious acts were clearly part of the government's re-victimization process. I filed a Title VII case of employment discrimination against a federal government agency, and the federal justice system put me on a systemic racism train of injustice with no stop button. 3 reasons why I cannot enter the U.S. Supreme Court. 1. I have identified perjury on page 1 of my writ of certiorari. Number 2, the government has no legal response brief in accordance with federal rules of appellate procedure to dispute my Title VII case. Therefore, my case is legally uncontested. Number 3, this case identifies the unlawful repeal of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the enactment of systemic law. Bottom line up front, if the government has no legal response brief in accordance with federal rules of appellate procedure, then the government has no legal defense. This unconstitutional nonsense is with the willful malicious intent of undermining our democracy and defeating the laws of equality and justice for all. 7th Circuit Court is boldly displaying their whites-only sign with the unlawful repeal of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I will try to explain this once again. All Americans are Americans. African Americans are Americans. Americans of the LGBTQ community are Americans. Why does the U.S. 7th Circuit Court of Appeals consist of neither? Is it reasonable for the federal government to repeal affirmative action when the U.S. 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago, the 2nd largest city in America, are still enacting laws of systemic racism? If God wanted us all to be of the same race, we would be. Or is it your systemic understanding that God made a mistake? I am a victim of upfront injustice. Upfront injustice is when the court sentences you to injustice until you give up on justice. Due to the egregious acts of the government, I have docketed in the U.S. District Court, U.S. Appellate Court, Illinois Circuit Court, Illinois Chancery Court, and I am currently in the Illinois Appellate Court with my eviction case. In this case, I have a fraudulent eviction order. Where can I find a legal court of law? If I win at Appellate Court, I'll go back to Circuit Court. If I lose, I will appeal to Illinois Supreme Court. This is a systemic racism trap. Why should I have to serve another sentence of upfront injustice? I am 5 years and counting. I have yet another legal case, this time with the Merit System Protection Board for denial of veterans' preference and hiring rights. This case, filed in 2016 against the Department of Labor, came up for appeal in 2023 after a 7-year break in work history. Equal employment in federal government agencies in Chicago is systemically defeated. Hire a legal review board and send my 7 years of back pay with punitive damages for the egregious acts of federal government agency number 2. No more sentences of upfront injustice. This re-victimization process is clearly systemic racism. As a recipient of the Presidential Letter of Appreciation from President Barack Obama, I now have more legal cases than a convicted felon, and a federal judge rules that I like luster at best. I've practiced law in the federal and state courts up to the appellate court with 3 strikes at U.S. Supreme Court and without attorney. The government's defense of poor performance is a moot point. It is obvious that the justice system has a problem with who I am, what I have, and what I represent. a proud black woman. Try to take it away from me just because I am a proud black woman. Due to the malicious, egregious acts of the federal government, I was stripped of my veteran presidential benefits. My civil rights are repealed. My social security number is violated by the Social Security Administration. I was escorted by armed guards. Once filing in the federal courts, I was interrogated for 5 hours by a U.S. Assistant State's Attorney. My grades were falsified and admitted to. I was blocked from federal employment with veterans' preference in hiring, and prolonged injustice put my home into foreclosure. The federal justice system stole my right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I am an African American female. After a 31-year U.S. Army career, I must return my veteran benefits to the government. No presidential benefits from President Obama, no veterans' preference in hiring, no VA home loan, and your graduate degree earned after retirement is also voided. You can throw away the rest of those black benefits. You are an African American. Your equal rights are voided. Signed, the U.S. federal government. Thank you for your service. Are you stuck on stupid? This is a prime example of systemic racism on a preschool level. Sheena Louise Gibbs, a college honor graduate, was also victimized by SSA. SSA's egregious acts cost Sheena the loss of her financial stability, to include the loss of her residence. Sheena filed a declaration in this case testifying to working while black in SSA. On November 3rd, 2021, Sheena Gibbs was declared a missing person by Chicago's ABC 7 Eyewitness News. The U.S. federal courts will still not recognize that Black Lives Matter. Who protects America when America's armed forces are not protected? Since you are in control of justice, you can protect and defend also. Veterans are among the highest of the homeless population. I have served this country in military uniform for more than half of my life, having served under 5 U.S. presidents. This black female soldier is not playing with you. I filed a motion for summary judgment and presented the case law Forrester versus Rollin Board. This law legally voids the government's ability to win in summary judgment. The courts would not apply this law, nor did they address it in the court's ruling. The courts award judgment to the government based on the law of Agasaki, clearly identified as white privilege. How often has the court applied this unconstitutional law? The courts granted the government an extension to provide a response brief to my complaint. I then filed a motion to dismiss based on perjury and tort. Of course it was denied. The court then granted the government a second extension to provide a response brief. A response brief is the only document required of the defendant in appellate court. Once submitted, the courts rejected their response brief, then awarded them summary judgment. This is an attempt to collect a debt. The information I provide will be used to justify unequal application of law. An honest opinion from a self-taught law attorney, this case is a violation of the RICO Act all day long. The repeal of Title VII was written into systemic law by the U.S. Appellate Court. I am out of civil rights and I am out of U.S. federal courts, and I have not found equal justice under law. Justice for Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 now starts with the President of the United States. President Joe Biden, can the courts void presidential benefits granted by President Obama? Where can I find a legal court of law? President Biden, why is justice for Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 way up here with the President of the United States? It was enacted 59 years ago. Seventh Circuit, silly rabbit, tricks are for kids. I said, U.S. Army, you sure ain't ready for me yet. Void my presidential benefits granted by President Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States, and I will root out systemic racism in the federal justice system. Army strong all day long. America is a democracy. I know. I served. I address a white female judge as Your Honor, yet she rules I lack luster at best. As a recipient of the Presidential Letter of Appreciation from President Obama. Take all the honor out of the robe and put all due disrespect on the table. Chicago's 7th Circuit can't find justice on a map. There is no greater dishonor than avoided soldiers' benefits granted by the President of the United States after serving 31 years retired active duty with a presidential letter of appreciation from President Barack Obama. The court's job is to find the defendant's response brief in accordance with federal rules of appellate procedure. Without it, the government's case is history. Equal justice under law requires a response brief, not a systemic law. Agasaki cannot help you. It is a systemic law. I said U.S. Army retired. No more Karen waivers will be issued. I am somebody, a child of the Most High God. God created us to live in love, peace, and harmony. One nation under God. As stated by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, keep hope alive. Reverend Jackson, I cannot thank you enough for your contributions in making Title VII of the Civil Rights Act into law. We now must work to make America apply it. I will continue on my peaceful march to justice until justice is served. God can do anything but fail. All glory to God, and God bless America. Now hit subscribe, like, share, put it all the way out there. God bless.